you all understand. You all understand how important civic engagement and civic participation is. Um, and this is a graph actually from I think it's NJ Monitor or NJ.com article. I think I have the source down here um, that shows voter participation in New Jersey. And in the last presidential election in 2024, um, voter turnout in New Jersey was the lowest it has ever been historically in a presidential election. How many of you, just by a show of icons on your thing or a show of hands, or in the chat, are surprised by that, shocked by that, or I'd love to kind of see if you are surprised to hear that that was the lowest ever. So we have a couple. We have not surprised. Anyone else not surprised? I will say that as much as I thought that voter participation, oh, yeah, okay, great. We have a bunch of chats coming in, or at least they're coming in now. So we have, I think, a split. We have a bunch of folks saying no, not surprised, a bunch of folks saying yes, surprised. Um, yeah, so we have, and I agree. We have comments that say New Jersey demoralized voters. That could possibly be true. We have, a gamut of responses from surprised to not surprised. And Barbara actually mentioned, yes, surprised, but expected less than usual, but not in history. I agree. I've been doing this work for a bit, and that was my reaction too. I really thought that we were going to have a decrease in turnout. I did not expect it to be the lowest ever in New Jersey. Granted, we in New Jersey and historically have had a decent turnout. This was actually lower or just about on par with the national average, which we've usually blown out of the water. So you can see historically, we had 72% turnout last time, which of course was an all, which was a COVID year problem. And then we had something like, it actually says 67, but it should be 62% of voters or in the first then. And that was during Sandy 2012. And then 68%. So essentially we have a voter turnout, voter participation decrease and a trend that we've been seeing for years, right? This is not necessarily a new issue. It's an issue that's been going on that might be exacerbated by, other things that are going on in our political climate right now. Um, when you look at the stats a little bit more, turnout dropped in every single county. So it wasn't just one county that was driving this, it was all across New Jersey. And then in particular, in Atlantic, Burlington, Essex, and Cumberland, we had turnout that dropped by more than 10%. That's a pretty huge drop, right, in each of these counties. I'd love to hear, and I know that you all put in the chat where you're from, but if you're from Atlantic, Burlington, Essex, or Cumberland, please put that in the chat because I'd love to see if you were, and I'd love to get your thoughts on whether you felt this was true. And then, of course, I think people know this in general, but presidential elections are pretty special. A lot of folks normally come out for that in general. And then we have really low voter participation, pretty much almost half of what we see in the presidential elections in non-presidential election years, right? And in Jersey, we are super lucky. We have an election every single year. How many of us vote every single year? Anybody? All right, I see a lot of hands. Doc, you have to. Um, and that's great. Yeah, so we have lots of folks who vote every single year. I do too. I will also confess, I didn't always. In the beginning, I really used to, when I first started voting, I was really big on voting. Civic participation in this way was really huge in my family. But there were lots and lots of elections that were much more local that I didn't pay attention to. That completely changed a number of years ago, but for sure. Thank you for all the I do, yes, and of course is. So you're a really special group, right? Because you're going to be we're all here going to be part of the 30 to 40% turnout that we get in New Jersey, for the non-presidential election years. But I want to really just point out that means 60% of voters are not voting in these elections, right? That's huge. The next slide. And so then we also look a little bit more about who is participating and who isn't participating in our democracy in New Jersey. So the New Jersey counties with the highest turnout in 2024 were Hunterdon, Gloucester, Cape May, Monmouth, Morris, Ocean, and Sussex, with really upper 70s or 70s and above in terms of voter turnout. And then the New Jersey counties with the lowest turnout included Essex. So I see Kathy from Essex is here. There are other folks from Essex that I see in here as well. Hudson, Cumberland, Mercer, and Passaic with the lowest turnout this year. We also had, again, we also have, as we know, as I've mentioned before, every single county dropped by voter participation. So it's a problem for all of us who live in anywhere in New Jersey. So when you look at racial and demographic data in New Jersey, the state of New Jersey does not directly collect this data in terms of who's voting and who isn't. So we do have to extrapolate. There are a number of ways to extrapolate. One of them is to look at the population in the different counties and correlate that with voter turnout. Um, and so, for example, we happen to know that Essex is about 60, almost 63% BIPOC, so communities of color. Out of those, almost 37% are Black. Hudson is 50, almost 59% BIPOC, with almost 16% Asian, almost 14% non-white Hispanic, right? And Hunterdon is 83%. White, non-Hispanic white, and Gloucester is 76% non-Hispanic white. So you can see just in the data that there is a racial disparity in terms of the voter participation. We also have a socioeconomic disparity, which I'm not showing on here as well, but you can actually parse out the data. But at the baseline, voter turnout or lack of voter turnout is an issue for all of us all across New Jersey. So next slide. Oh, and I see some Gloucester, Essex, and Monmouth folks on here. So I'm so glad you're here because I really think we have a lot of work to do everywhere, but particularly in those countries. So I'd love to hear from you. Why does it matter that we had a decreased voter turnout? And why should we really care about it? We're over here in this room are the ones who are voting, so why should we care that folks are not voting? And I'd love to hear, I'd love to have that in the chat, why you think people should care. And then, the other issue, which is what impact do you think this has? And if anyone wants to come off mute and share their thoughts, you're welcome to as well.
It's civic engagement. It's the most direct form, I think, of being able to participate.
Mm. I'm sorry, who was that? Who said it? Can you just share your name? Because
Well,
there's,
this is Randy Davis.
oh, hi, Randy. Yeah, so why should we care? And what do you think the impact is of folks not participating? For you or anyone else?
I think it's sad that people don't exercise the right to vote when in fact I believe people have died in order to allow, democracies and people, allowed to vote. So what I'm concerned about is that different segments of the population will control what happens in our country, as opposed to equal representation of all, peoples in all areas, in all socioeconomic levels. So that's what concerns me.
I agree and agreed 100%. Anyone else? I
Um,
know we have folks in the chat
I'm-
sharing. Oh, sorry, is someone coming off mute to share?
yes, it's Kathy from Essex.
Okay.
It's one of the things that I try to do with, especially with our youth registration. When you say the 40% turnout, that means maybe 22% pick the winner or pick,
Mm-hmm.
and
That's right.
so to have them understand that there's only 20% of us registered voters, not citizens, registered voters that are really winning. And so that to me is a frightening thing. And I and what impact people are not getting the services they want, are not getting what their needs may met. So and so they don't think it's. I think it goes back to your first slide where they don't think it's worth voting. It's
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
and and interestingly enough, I did register in both um, Newark and East Orange, but I also did the Caldwells up here and
Mm.
Cedar Grove and all. And I've had a couple of conversations where the students I talk to, we always talk about local and federal
Mhm.
government, and some of them said they weren't even interested in voting in
Mm.
general last year. So, and this was both, wealthy
Mhm.
and the less
Mhm.
wealthy
Yeah.
areas. So,
Yeah. No, those are some great insights. Thank you for sharing, Kathy. I think you're right. It cuts across, right? It cuts across actually all segments of our population, particularly when we get to sort of this point, when you're looking at this. And so we have a couple of comments in the chat, and I think this echoes a lot of what you're saying. So Emily talks about how the elected are making decisions about our lives, and all voices should be heard. So I always point out that, whether or not you vote, decisions are being made. Whether or
mhm.
not they're made with your input or not is really what the question is there, right? And so if you're not voting, if you're not part, if we have large swaths of the population that are not part of this infrastructure that we have, then decisions are going to be made that are probably not in the best interests of most of the folks, or they might not be, and that they're actually also going to um, not necessarily be reflective of the concerns that most of the folks are feeling. And I think we do have a general consensus or general sense of that in large parts of New Jersey. I think Amalia has a comment in here that says it leads to cynicism and incumbents not being responsive to voters. Like 100%. I think and then that becomes this like vicious, positive, negative feedback loop where you basically have more folks, dropping out of the system the more they feel disconnected. So I think it is really important for the good health of our democracy for more and more people to be voting and to be informed. And I think voting, and I'm just going to actually say, like, voting for me as part of the whole architecture of civic engagement or civic participation is just one part, right? And I think you all would agree that it's not just about the voting, but it's also about making sure that we are engaging with our community, that we're doing lots of different ways advocacy in terms of advocacy to really push our policies together. So I think I saw a hand earlier. I'm sorry, was there a hand before I move to the next slide? Okay, I'll go to the next slide, and then who had the hand up can share that again. So Zach, I'm sorry, can you go to the next slide? There you go. All right. So the general takeaway is in terms of why people are not voting, what impact this has is really, I don't, I think this is something familiar to all of us. People don't feel like their voices matter. Um, there are also systemic barriers to accessing the ballot, whether they're language, whether they're polling places. There's a whole bunch of that there. And then I think really, essentially, when fewer people vote, policy decisions only reflect a small group. And that is not what our representational democracy is supposed to be about. So next slide. So what can we do about this? What should we be doing about it? Any ideas in chat or otherwise? All right, next slide, Zach. So I'm going to share something that we are doing with the League and Million Voters Project, which is really trying to build civic power from the ground up. And this includes advocacy at the state and local level. You all know the League's advocacy, but also investing in community organizing. And so what you all are doing with the Leagues in your local communities is exactly that, right? Is community organizing. Um, and then storytelling and narrative change is going to be a big part of really how we deep canvas, how we talk to people. And I'll share a little bit more about that. And then all of this leading to strengthening our civic infrastructure. So getting more people civically engaged, getting more people into our general coalitions. And then of course, voting in elections up and down the ballot, right? It's all part of like one big piece, things that we need to do. So next slide. So how are we going to do this with New Jersey Million Voters Project? What is it? So Million Voters Project, NJMVP, it's a nonpartisan coalition of community organizations. It also includes faith groups, labor unions, and we're committed to engaging and empowering voters. And it's really we're focusing on the 2025 elections in New Jersey, but that is sort of the test case. And this year, what we're really hoping to do is to use our model, use the data that we get from the kinds of things that we're doing to, as an iterative process to better our outreach, better our strategies, and make it a part of what we do in New Jersey from now moving forward. So we're partnering with We the People Coalition, that is the civic engagement table that we're hoping to have statewide moving forward. But we're really concentrating this year on moving and engaging with voters for 2025, including the primary as well as the general. So why 2025? Y'all are a very civically educated audience. You know exactly why 2025, but I'm going to lay it out anyway. So 2025 is a defining moment or a defining year for New Jersey in a lot of different ways. It will be the gubernatorial election this year will be shaping New Jersey's future for the next decade. For example, redistricting and putting those commissions up is just right around the corner. I know those of us who've been doing this for a little while might say that we just finished it, but it's coming back up again. It's also the first election post the 2024 presidential race. We are one of two states across the US that have an election this year, and such an important one in terms of the gubernatorial election. We are one of, so us and Virginia have the gubernatorial election this year. So we already have eyes on us from a national level to see how voters react, whether they're going to be dropping out of the system even more, or whether we have more folks joining in, actually participating post the last election. So I think in many ways, New Jersey becomes a bellwether for how the national civic architecture looks at what is happening in our cities and towns and with our voters. And then, of course, it is the first open primary in a generation. We have, or more, we have no ballot line. We have a reformed ballot in our primaries this year, which is very exciting. That partially has led to a number of candidates on both sides, which is a very exciting and very democratic process that we should be having in general. So it is a once in a generation opportunity, I think, to amplify voices, particularly of those who are historically, who historically haven't been in the civic infrastructure, who haven't voted as much for a number of reasons, and to build power. So because of all this, we're really excited to launch the Million Voters Project. We launched this in December of last year with a coalition that you see on the screen, as well as more folks. Thrilled that the League is an exciting partner with us. And what are our goals? So that's the next slide. So we have a very modest goal, which is to engage with 1 million voters across New Jersey by the end of the 2025 elections. So when the election day, the day after election day rolls around in November of this year, we will have engaged with 1 million voters across New Jersey in multiple different ways. We're going to be using door knocking and canvassing with this deep canvassing, deep listening script that I'm talking about today, as well as a few phone banking, as well as text banking. Next slide. And then what are we doing when we knock on doors? Our goal is to really connect with folks in a non-transactional way. we are trying to lay the foundation for this to be a transformational process and not just a transactional process where campaigns come in and out and, kind of talk to people, trying to get people to get out the vote and sort of, disappear, until the next election cycle. So sometimes it's every 4 years, sometimes it's every 2 years, whatever it may be for particular offices. What we really want to do is start reaching out to people now and then continue to be the resource for them moving forward. And so the way we do that is by storytelling and eliciting their stories, actually. So we want to amplify their stories, amplify the issues, particularly of communities of color that have been historically dropping out by design and not, as well as increase voter participation and civic engagement. So we don't just look at we're not just going to be looking at our results by, how many more people are voting, but also in terms of, how else can we get them in to be more engaged, whether that means that they advocate in their local community groups, whether that means we help them, push, an issue at at a different level, all of that. And then really all of this is to build lasting power, particularly in our communities of color, and of course, create a more inclusive democracy, since we started off talking about the fact that that is really important. So next slide. So how are we going to do that? All of this sounds really great, but what is the actual work? The actual work is what we need more of you for, which is knocking on doors and really deep listening or deep canvassing through door-to-door canvassing. We're also doing things like community meetings and town halls. So for those of you who are in Central Jersey, we are having a listening session on Saturday morning at 10 a.m. In Highland Park. We'll drop a link to it a little bit later for our community meeting. So that's going to be one of those. And we had one last Saturday in Newark for North Jersey. And then also connecting voters with civic engagement programs that we are doing, that our partners, like the League and others are also doing as well. Next slide. So what we plan to do, door-to-door and relational canvassing to engage voters. And these are going to be narrative-based conversations. And so the idea is to shift people's perspectives and to mobilize action. And they're going to be issue-focused discussions, and they're actually going to be discussions based on what the voters tell you. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And that could include everything that I list here: housing, healthcare, wages, education, or more. It could be like a very personal problem as well that the voter is having. So all of this is going to be on a foundation of data. So everything is, we're trying our best to track everything. So it's going to be data-driven tracking using the VAN system. So we have a nonpartisan van that we're using with which we're going to pull lists, or we have been pulling lists. And then we're using the minivan app. So whenever you're going door to door, you're putting everything down in that app. So we have real-time kind of data that we get on here. And then what we're planning on doing with the data that we're getting from all of our partners, that we will be getting from all of our partners by the primary, is really refining what those questions are, and our outreach strategies after the primary. So from here to so there are a couple of different phases in this. So from now until the primary, it's going to be door-to-door knocking to understand the issues that the voters care most about. And that's really with these conversations that we're going to be having, and then a little bit of persuasion, but it's going to be mostly really listening. And then after the primaries, once we have, a critical mass of data and we hear what folks are telling us and what are the most important issues, we're really going to be moving a little bit more towards persuasion in terms of civic engagement for the general election. Again, this is all nonpartisan. So next slide. Okay, so we're going to be doing that using something called deep canvassing. And we're really using, at least for the first portion of it, a little bit more of a deep listening model rather than deep canvassing. So with the show of hands or icons or in the chat, how many of you have heard of deep canvassing before? Anyone? Nope, I see nods, shaking heads no. One yes. Great. All right. couple of yeses, some folks saying recently. All right, great. So there are a couple of yeses in the chat. So some folks are familiar with it, some are not. So hopefully I'll share a little bit more about what deep canvassing is and why it's important. So next slide. Has anyone actually done deep canvassing? I know folks are familiar with it. I'd love to see if any of the yeses have done deep canvassing before. Don't be shy. Let us know. Gosh, I was really hoping to rope you into this training for the next half, but I've door knocked. Is that the same? It's almost the same. It's not. It depends on how you door knocked, Emily. And we'll talk about what the similarities and differences are. And I'm glad that there are folks who really want to know how to do it. So I hadn't really done deep canvassing before until this past election year. I'd heard a lot about it. It is a really interesting concept, in my opinion, and it's actually really interesting and very different than door knocking. So how many of you have door knocked before? Show of hands. Yes, yeah, a bunch of hands door knocking before. How many of you have done phone banking? Yes, show of hands. Great. Yes, a lot of yeses. Some people have done postcards. Some people have done, yeah, phone banking, door knocking. Great. So folks in general are familiar with the model of door knocking, which is, and I've done this a bunch of times, knocking on the door, talking to the voter, usually to persuade them, usually really quickly, and really saying, here, you should go out and vote, or a reminder, hey, today's election day, or election day is coming up. Do you have a plan to vote? That's very familiar. I've done this with the league a bunch of times, every election in here. And those are all really valuable, right? Deep canvassing actually is sort of, several steps before that. So what it is, it's persuasion through storytelling and shared values. And so these are all, what you're having are authentic, relatively unscripted conversations that are focusing on learning and understanding the voter's point of view and not just delivering a message. So in canvassing that I've done before, it has been really at the end about delivering a message, like vote for such and such, right? Or, advocate for such and such, or go, vote on this day. This is really about understanding the voters' perspective and the voters' point of view, and not coming in necessarily with your own agenda, which is it's a huge difference in terms of your mentality as you approach a door. It's also about personal storytelling. So you're building empathy by sharing your lived experience. And it's really about taking that time to understand the other person's perspective. So traditional canvassing is really short. It's message-based conversations focusing on turnout, whereas this encourages a longer two-way conversation. So deep canvassing conversations can last and should be lasting something like 10 minutes or so, which is a whole different ballgame, right? Because when you're door knocking, otherwise you're given like a list of 60 doors, and you're going to try and hit 60 doors in an hour and try and have, as many sort of ways of like delivering that message as possible in that hour. Whereas with deep canvassing, what we're really saying is, hey, in your shift, if you had 3 great conversations that were like 10 minutes and you really felt like you connected with that person, that's awesome. That's really what we want. So next slide. So why deep canvassing? So folks have used deep canvassing. It has actually a long history of being used, or at least 10 years or more. I think it was first used in California for persuasion around the proposition for gay marriage in California. And so folks used it there really effectively. It was a long campaign, but they used it effectively to change hearts and minds. And so with that, actually, when you look at the political studies that talk about how you move the needle, how you help people become more compassionate or have beliefs that you're trying to advocate for, we've had lots of studies that have used this not just for LGBTQ rights, but more recently for trans rights, for abortion access, for a whole bunch of topics related to, for example, giving immigrants more rights, and they really run the gamut. And these studies actually show, and all across, so not just in California, we've seen this in the Midwest. We saw this actually in 2024. For those of you who know the organization Changing the Conversation, they had actually a big effort in Philadelphia for the 2024 election as well, and others. So so political science studies show that it is really powerful persuasion, that you can have one 10 to 20-minute conversation and you can create something like a decade's worth of social change, which is mind-blowing when you think about it. You can successfully, if you employ this correctly, you can successfully change minds anywhere from, 17 times the average sort of persuasion effort that you have. What's been also interesting is that deep canvassing at its core um, really inoculates against fear-based messaging. So for those of us who are on social media, which is, I think most of us have seen a lot of fear-based messaging, have seen things that are out there that are about polarizing folks, and really doing deep canvassing and having these authentic conversations surprisingly inoculates against that. It's much less effective, which is a really powerful thing to know. It also really promotes connection across differences because you're basing it on your shared values with the other person. You don't have to agree with the other person on anything at all, except for having, some commonality in terms of shared values and really using that to form that connection. It's just really very human based, in my opinion. And also, what it does, which is different from traditional canvassing, is that you as a canvasser are going to be changed. You can't not have sort of these meaningful conversations and door knocking conversations without, being changed by what you're learning and how you're relating to the other person. So, next slide. So we've seen that there is a proven impact, again, in terms of increase in voter turnout and shifting on perspective. What we've also seen is that voters are more likely to stay involved in the long term when they feel heard. And the best way to feel heard is really having that authentic connection with people. And then it really, at the crux of it, starts building stronger communities, particularly when you're canvassing in your own neighborhood or in your own communities in particular, but also across the board. Because what you're doing is building trust and you're building this relationship. And again, I'm going to say what I said earlier on, which is that we're really rooted in the belief that we can do this without it being transactional. And that comes across when you're having these conversations. Next slide. So to that end, as you can imagine, this is very exciting to do, but it's really hard work and it requires a lot of resources, which means it requires a lot of human power. It requires a lot of you being brave and vulnerable enough to come door knocking. I will promise you, when you do this, you will absolutely 100% come back changed from this, even like one session of it. In here. And I think this is absolutely worthwhile to do. So next slide. So what are we doing exactly? So with NJMVP, we have a universe again that we're pulled from a Van Axis that is nonpartisan. So we don't know whether or not these folks have a party affiliation. We're just looking at their propensity to vote. So we have a universe where folks that includes people who did not vote in the 2024 elections, as well as at least one elections since 2020. So they're lower propensity voters. And then if you actually then also look at whether or not they're voters of color or other working class voters or young voters in here, we actually have approximately 1 million voters in New Jersey that fit all of these categories. So low propensity, which is where we're getting the 1 million voters from. So these are low propensity voters who are disengaged or they're skeptical about the political process. We pull them out by county, also by city. And then they also include working class communities that are impacted by economic and social issues in particular. So next slide, Zach. So where are we going to be? So we're going to be door knocking. Really, essentially, the tagline is on the bottom, everywhere where there are low propensity voters, which means really everywhere across New Jersey, including your own communities. We do have some special targeted communities we've identified through turnout data analysis. So when we look at, when we look at this universe of the low propensity voters that I described to you, where are they, sort of most concentrated? This includes high density urban areas with a history of voter disenfranchisement. So we're looking at you, Newark, we're looking at you, Camden, because of really a strategic, systemic, intentional barriers that were put in place historically. As well as suburban areas, particularly those with some shifting demographics. And then other key counties and districts. So, we already know that, Essex will be part of this effort, we hope, as well as, Monmouth. We're hoping that folks in Gloucester County will also come out. So next slide. And this is where you all come in. This is where we need your help. So we would, and I'm going to go into the script for the deep canvassing for the second part of this particular presentation, but we really need your help. We need volunteers to come out door knocking with us and our partners. The league has committed to knocking on 2,000 doors between now and the June primary, and texting 75,000 voters between now and the June primary. So to be able to do that, we need your help. Um, we need folks who can host the canvases with your local league. We're happy to help build the list, in partnership with the league. Obviously, we have the scripts, we have, kind of all the back end materials that you need, but we really need folks to host canvases, particularly in some of the areas that we've identified that we've shared before, but really across the board. And we need volunteers that can come and turn out for these particular canvases. And then if you're a member of the league, obviously these are all things that you could do with your local league. If you're a member of a different New Jersey organization, I'd love for you to be able to join NJMVP with us and host and participate in these events. We're really rolling out a whole bunch of canvases. As you can say, we only have 2 months, sort of barely 2 months at this point, because it's April 3rd and the June primary is June 10th. Between now and then. So we have a lot of work to do. Our goal as a coalition is to hit 75,000 doors between now and June primary, and the majority of them before the end of May. And the reason for that is because we are asking folks what their biggest issues are, what is keeping them up at night. That's literally one of the questions. That's the second question that we ask. And so we're taking those issues, those stories that people are telling us telling our canvassers, we're putting them into a bigger data infrastructure, and we're going to be doing data releases. And we want to be able to release that data before the primary. So everyone knows, kind of what are the big issues that are driving folks in New Jersey, particularly voters who are of low propensity. And so a high opportunity, really, in terms of being able to get them more civically engaged. So I'm going to pause now, and next slide, Zach, and then really take some questions before I delve more deeply into the canvassing script that we have, and then maybe do a little bit of role playing with you all about how this works. So any questions, or just anything that is coming up from this summary so far? Oh, Naomi, I see your hand.
Yes, I do. I'm very new to all of this, but so I have a question. When you say hosting canvassing, can you just go into a little bit more detail about what that is?
Sure. Yeah. And welcome. I'm glad that you're new and you're here and you're participating. So thank you for that. We need more of you. I appreciate that very much. So are you a member of your local league,
I
or is
am,
it?
but I
Okay,
joined just before the 2024 elections.
got
Um,
it.
so I'm
Um,
pretty.
s- uh, and you're here, which is what matters. So you can host canvases in multiple different ways. You can decide that your local league will, host a canvas. So you can decide that there is a weekend or a week where you get volunteers from your local community or your local league to go knock on doors or, do a phone bank or a text. Actually, it's a text bank and knocking on doors. Those are two things. This. But at a particular weekend, and then you let actually Zach will tell you more of like sort of the operationalizing, whether they tell you, Zach, or they kind of decide to do this. So because I know that from NJMVP can provide resources that we can provide. So for example, if you're in, I'm just going to make this up, Essex, say you're in South Orange or something like that, we can, and you'd like to canvass in there, we can provide you with lists of low propensity voters in South Orange, and list numbers, and train you on how to use the minivan app, and then you and you know your local league members can go in your community, knock on the doors, gather that data, and share that with us via van. So that's sort of, if that's helpful to
Yeah.
conceptualize.
This is Randy. I would say that it would be good to coordinate with the local league. And as a Camden County League, I'm one of the officers, and we would try to create situation in which we would maybe suggest some parameters around it so that we're providing some guidance for our local league members.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm sure there's another way. Zach, I don't know if there are other things that you all do in the league.
Yeah, I know. If anybody has connected previously with Melissa, Leonard was our point of contact for the campaign. Unfortunately, just left our staff. I know we were coming up with a strategy as to how to make sure our local league members that are tapped in kind of have all those guardrails of like how we're going to run this, which events are we picking. And I know that Melissa's compiled a little bit of a list for that. So in that follow-up is going to have multiple links and avenues to take direct action, whether it be with your local league or if your local league wants to start. I know that we had a short list of some leagues that had committed to doing some of those activities. But in that
Well,
follow-up, which I'll make sure.
we had invited Leonard to our last meeting and earlier in March, and then he wasn't there. So that must have been about the time that he left, I guess. So
Yes, I'm sorry.
that's fine.
So and that's we're trying to kind of now transition with he was running this campaign. So and we have a new staff member onboarding right now who's going to be leading this. But please send, in that follow-up, it's going to have those resources clearly outlined. But in between now and then too, please feel free to reach out to me, and Melissa and I will reach back out, Naomi, and try to connect you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Zach.
So, so this is Evelyn in Monmouth County. Do you at this time have a list of target areas? So are there target areas in Monmouth County that you would be able to say, these are where we would want people
Yeah.
to go?
Yeah, happy to talk about this a little bit more. So right now we have some partners who are doing Red Bank in Monmouth County, but we're really open to, other areas. So if you are like, hey, we'd really like to do in, X, Y, and Z area, and come to us with that, that'd be great.
Well, in Monmouth County, we we have members in all the municipalities around the county. And so if you're in Red Bank, that would be terrific. Another question I have is
I can also just so you know, I can also just pull an all Monmouth County list, and then we can decide like where y'all want to do, which would be great.
Because another question, and I guess maybe I should wait until you talk more about what the deep canvassing is, but if we are targeting areas with people of color, as a cisgender white woman of a certain age, 74 years old, I'm not sure I'm the best person to be knocking on a door and expecting someone who has never seen me and I would probably be with someone else as well. So, is there a way for us to team up so that we aren't, so that we've done this a few years ago? We did this in Neptune, and we partnered with a partner here in Neptune who knew the community, and there were specific districts that were low turnout, and we went door to door, matched up with people, and that worked. But I felt like if we were just wandering around, not knowing the area at all, people would not be opening their doors, and they would be, sending their dogs out because they'd be worried about why were we coming there.
100%. Thank you for highlighting two actually really important things. So I really appreciate those comments, Evelyn. Um, so one, absolutely. Like depending on, where you're going and who you present as, one should be in all these cases like really cognizant of how one might be coming across, right? Like in particular communities. So we do have, especially when we're doing the actual training, like the day of, we do have particular things that we, share. We try and like team you up with folks. If one of us is running it, if you all are running this, I would actually say that if Monmouth County League really wants to run this, we could hook up with some of the partners that we have. I'm trying to blanking on their name, but Latino Action Foundation, is one of the partners that we have down there. And actually, we have also CARC, Community Affairs Resource Center, as well as Lazos Unidos and Casa Freehold, that we've been working with down there. Well, we haven't quite worked with them, but Lan has been working with them, so
Yeah,
we're trying to get.
we have a partnership with Casa Freehold.
Okay, great. Yeah. So you could partner with them and say, and come to Zach or me or however we're going to move this forward with like, hey, we'd like to do this with them, and like here's the date, and then we would sort of take care of that, and we would figure out how we're going to do that. And then yes, and it usually does work best, Evelyn, as you pointed out, in particular communities to like hook up with other organizations as well. One, it makes your canvas actually really fun. And I'm a big believer if you're doing this, we should also be having fun. And so that's great. You meet more folks across different communities in your town or in your county. And then two, it actually really helps in terms of, depending on where you're door knocking. And so, yes, so some of them are going to be communities of color, but not every, for us, first, it's not a perfect science. Secondly, we're also looking at working class communities. So we're also looking at, socioeconomic changes and things along those lines. So the other point you were making is, it's also true is that, we're going to have a gamut of folks that we're knocking on their doors and we're not really going to know who they are. And then the third point, actually, to your thing, we do also have our scripts right now translated in Spanish. I think our partners at AAPN New Jersey might have at least one other Asian language, maybe two, but I will have to check with them. So we have those resources as well as, folks. So if you're going into an area that might be more Spanish speaking, then there are also, partnering with folks who speak that is also helpful. And then Make the Road, New Jersey. So New Jersey Million Voters is housed with Make the Road right now, and I'm working with them. And so Make the Road has a big presence in Perth Amboy as well. So all of those resources are there, and really thank you for that point that we make. And I really want to make us all cognizant of that. I'm cognizant of that in different communities that we go into. The other thing is, particularly now, I don't know if you all have door knocked in 2025 yet. I will say the experience is different than what it was in 2024. There are a lot of folks who are worried about people who are knocking at their door, who won't necessarily open the door because they're worried about ICE. They are worried about, other events and police, et cetera, coming at the door. So we've, are I am actually most familiar with Make the Road and their canvassing operation. So we've employed other things. So for example, we knock on the door and our canvassers step actually way back to make sure that you don't feel as if like someone's going to come into your house. Um, Conversations have been had through the window, or you just kind of let them sort of say like, hey, if it's more comfortable, you want to be at the window, I'll be outside, I'm happy to talk to you then. And so that has actually really worked really well. Wearing anything that looks like you have, an official, volunteer thing. So like wearing a league pin or wearing something like that is really helpful as well. And then most importantly, and this I'll go over in the script in a minute, approaching somebody as friendly as you can make your demeanor. It doesn't mean you have to smile all the time, but really be like looking very approachable. And, it's sort of body language is actually a huge thing, especially these days in terms of like if someone's going to open their door or not. But yeah, those are very real. Those are very real concerns, and I appreciate you highlighting them. Any other questions or concerns before I move on to the script? Okay. All right. So I'm going to do a little bit of a script preview. I actually have a couple of slides that show, sort of the whole entire preview, but I'm going to really just concentrate on a couple of them. And I've really told you what we ask. So next slide. Next slide. Sorry. Okay, great. So before we actually go into the script, what are the key steps of a deep canvassing conversation? So I will tell you, when I took the deep canvassing training, it was like over 3 days, and it was like 3 or 4 hours each for all these calls. We're not doing all of that today. And in fact, even when I did that, people were like, well, you're just barely trained in deep canvassing. So I'm going to go back to what I said before, which is our first part of what we're doing with this is really a little bit more deep listening than deep canvassing. But the some of the steps are the same. So before we deep canvas, all of us, each of us as canvassers have to really think about our why, right? And so our why is rooted in who we are, and it's a very personal story for all of us. It's rooted in who or what we love. We've had canvassers really talk about like loving their dog and that being a motivating factor for why they're out there and canvassing and really reaching out to folks. Really who and what you love, why, and then really thinking about what you yourself might be most worried about and reaching across your experiences to be able to be vulnerable and actually share that with the voter. Um, it is quite a vulnerable and a brave thing to do when you're doing deep canvassing. But it's also immensely rewarding when you're talking to and having these conversations with folks. So the basics are really starting with a personal and friendly connection, coming with that demeanor that is as open as you can make it. And the key is engaging and active listening. So you should be talking less than the other person in this conversation, which is actually the flip side of what traditional canvassing is. Traditional canvassing, you are talking a lot. You're trying to convince the other person. Here, you're going to be convincing them by really listening. And so you're going to be exploring their beliefs, their experiences. You're going to say this a lot, which is tell me more. You're going to ask for that. And then you're going to share stories with the intent to getting them to share their stories. So impactful storytelling and making a connection based on values. And then and with that, I think really, even though I have it written in steps, it really just becomes a really good conversation, right? Like when you're having a good conversation with somebody and you talk about like, what your values are, and it could be something like your kids and what you hope and aspire for your kids, that you can focus on, that shared values, not necessarily just persuasion. And then you close with an action. You either encourage them to, be engaged further. You could say like, hey, we'd love to have you be, and we'd love to send you more information. We'd love to encourage you to, vote or whatever it is, however that conversation sort of ends. So for this part, we're really not emphasizing that persuasion piece, or neither are we really training you too much on that persuasion piece. Next slide. And part of it is because I think all of us who do this are hardwired to persuade, just like in our heads. And then some best practices and principles. Again, I've said this all before. Be conversational, use a friendly, natural tone. You're engaging genuinely. There is a script, but you're not reading from the script necessarily. Be curious and open. And this is really important. Listen without judgment, no matter what they're telling you. This is hard. It's hard for me. I'm a parent of two teenage boys. Trust me, it's really hard to listen without judgment. But to be able to do that, I think the more we practice, and then really try and build rapport. And then keep whatever your responses are short and clear. Like I'm talking way more than I ever would in one of these conversations. Um, and then really reflect and validate. So there are going to be emotions that come up that you can acknowledge that they have and introduce like new perspectives. And then really, whenever possible, use their name, like reference like a voter's name, reference the community that you're in. Like Evelyn, it's like, what do you really care about the most? What do you love about living in Monmouth County? Like that kind of stuff. And then definitely follow up. Always, always, always follow up. Always thank them. End it with like a really clear step of action. And then this is really important. Out of all of that, if people really expresses like that they're hostile or that they have discomfort or they really don't want to talk to you, you can conclude the conversation and move on. You don't have to be sitting, standing there for, a long time trying to kind of do this over and at it. There is a little bit of a there's a little bit of a fine line between our sort of minor discomfort because sometimes when we're having these conversation, it kind of feels like we're being a little bit too intrusive into someone's life, and respecting boundaries. So you wait for them to sort of say like, "Hey, I don't want to really talk to you," or like this is or become hostile. And I will say that we really just haven't had a whole lot of that. Most people really, when you connect with you. Okay, next slide. Okay. So, the script in general, so it begins with door knocking. You introduce yourself. So it would be something like knock on the door. Hi, Anne. You're next to me on the sketch. Hi, my name is Arati. I'm with New Jersey Million Voters Project. Are you Anne? Or is Anne available? Oh, great. How are you doing? I'm here today because we are talking to people I've forgotten where you're from, Anne. I'm sorry. We're talking to people in Glen Rock about challenges that we have in our community. And we really think that there are issues that folks, are really not talking about as much as we need to. And we just really want to be here to understand your experiences and your ideas. That's good, right? And so usually people just say yes because we're sort of conditioned to like nod. And they say, great. What do you like most about living here? Like, what do you like most about living in, South Orange? And then they'll say like, oh, well, I like this or that, or I really don't like living here. Like, oh, sorry, so you kind of have that conversation. And I usually try and start with like something positive, which is like, what do you like most about, whatever, to kind of get them in a different frame of mind. And then say, I hear you. I hear that people are, talking about how times can be tough, or you can just segue into that's really great. I'm so glad you enjoy living here. I would love to know what's keeping you up at night. Are there issues that are really important to you, um, that are stressing you out, that are keeping you up at night? And then you wait really uncomfortably to you long time. And it'll be 2 seconds, it'll be 3 seconds, and then you just stop. And they will talk to you and they will tell you, especially if you just are quiet. And they will start talking to you and tell you what their story is or what it is that they're really concerned about. And I guarantee everybody has something that is keeping them up at night. Unfortunately, it's very rare to find somebody who doesn't have, issues that they're really concerned with. So next slide. So we also have a survey in our minivan. And when I do the trainings, I try and say that those issues are issues that I would prefer if you're having an authentic conversation with them, you are not going to go to your minivan and say, like, and from this list, what are the issues that concern you? However, if you're really having a hard time connecting with them, you can just be like, hey, you know what? I have a couple of questions. Can I ask you these questions? I just really want to know, are there, particular issues that matter to you? We have a list. If you can't come up with, something, I can ask you from the list. Is that okay? And then, they usually say yes, and then you can kind of go from the list. Or usually what happens is people tell you what is keeping them up at night or what is most stressful to them. And it'll be, so for example, a conversation I had was like, you know what? Childcare. Like I'm really worried about, how I'm going to pay for my kids' childcare. And so that kind of comes up and you're able to sort of put that, you're able to collect that data after you finish your conversation. Just you're going to remember it because you had an actual conversation. And it wasn't just sort of taking the survey, and that it came up naturally, and they'll probably tell you a story related to it. And then you kind of share your story when they share when they share theirs. So for example, a conversation I had to do with somebody who was like, oh, um, we I can't even remember how it started, but they were really worried about healthcare. And they were worried about how they were going to pay for the cost of their loved ones, healthcare. And I shared a story where I said, that is really hard. And, you know, I had a similar situation where I was taking care of my mom for 2 years when she had terminal cancer. And it was a really, really stressful place to be, along with everything else that you're going. I found it most stressful dealing with insurance companies. Is that what's stressful to you? Or is there another thing? So, we had this conversation because I shared something that was authentic and painful and stressful that I went through. And they were able to share then sort of, what was concerning to them and so why that was concerning. We had actually a really long conversation. And they went from a view that wouldn't necessarily be my view in that particular context, but to a place where we understood each other, in a way that we wouldn't have. So you don't have to do an hour-long story, but if you have things like that that you can share, it's helpful. And I think everyone does. So that's sort of the main portion of this. And then we really want to know how they're personally impacted by whatever issue. And then we try and segue into that's really tough. What do you wish was happening? What do you wish was better about this? So it's really like, how do you think the situation could be better handled? Um, what kind of help do you need really is what we're asking them. And then we're segueing into, do you think this issue could be handled better? Like, do you think you could have, would you wish for more help from our state and local government with this issue? And then sort of you're segueing into that. And then next question, next slide, Zach. And then we're also asking them sort of, so we're going from the issues that they care most about that are really, something that's affecting their daily lives that are keeping them up at night to what they wish some of the solutions were. Um, and then do you think government has a role to play here? Can they help you? What do you wish was happening? What kind of help do you think you need? And then from there's a little bit of a segue from, what do you think the state government should be doing? And then, moving on to at some point, um, so do you know that have you heard that there is a governor's race and an assembly race this year? And usually people are like, no, is there already? That's a lot of, those are a lot of the responses. And you're like, yes, there is a primary on June 10th. For the first time, we're going to have ballot reform. Do you think you're planning on voting? Usually, frankly, the answer will be no, maybe. I'm not really sure. And then sort of you can go from there to create, I think that it might be helpful because if, folks, they don't know what those issues are, I'm taking some of this down right now to be able to share that, but really a powerful way for you to enable folks to help you is to vote and, and have that power. And really be able to make your voice heard in that way. Would you consider voting? Yes, no, maybe. Great, we can, incredible, you're going to vote already. That's awesome. Can we give you more information? Can we get your information? Well, we'd love to send you more information about it. Or no, not really. Okay, I get it. Like, you might need more time to think about it. Can we take your information down? We'd love to share just, more things about the kinds of things that we're going, or the issue that you're concerned with. And we'd love to tell you more and hear from you, right? Especially if they say no or maybe, like you really want to hear from them. And I genuinely do, like we genuinely want to hear their thoughts about that. So that's sort of the conversation in a nutshell. We do have like a scale of 0 to 5, questions in here. So that's if they are receptive to it. We really want them to tell us like, what do they think about the cost of living in New Jersey? What do they think about employment? What do they think about whether or not the state government should be helping, with this particular issue? So we have those in there. They're not like none of these questions are ones where we want you to go take it down and sort of like ask them in a very robotic way. They're really supposed to, the first two questions where we're really asking them what their issues are and, and segueing into whether or not they think the government has a role to play here are kind of the ones that we really want to get at. And then we'd love to, in the minivan app, there is a place for notes. We'd love for you to share your notes about the conversation and how it went and all of that kind of stuff. And we also actually I have not figured this out with the league yet, but in other canvases, we actually also have a tally sheet or, what people are comfortable with, like people just write down quotes from what people told them. You don't have to identify them. But quotes are really, are really powerful. We've had quotes like where people are like, I don't vote because I don't have time to because I'm working 3 jobs. That's a really powerful kind of, a story or a quote to like remember for us and for us to be able to actually share with our data and share with, the candidates in general and folks who are making these decisions. So we'd love for you to kind of, you know, note take that as well, and we'll figure out whether it'll be by hand, whether it's Google Forms. We've done a bunch of those things. So next slide. That's a note slide, no vote plan one. Next slide. And then really we're just closing. Sometimes we ask this question because we do have a lot of languages, and these are actually the 10 most spoken languages in New Jersey. And so sometimes we ask this question just for language access to make sure we have this. Mostly because we'd love to have more data on languages in general, but particularly non-Spanish ones as well. And then next slide. Okay. So I think we have about 15 minutes left, but we'd love to have you all do an interactive role play. So we were planning on doing breakout sessions, so just 2 people per session. And we just want you to sort of pair up and practice a mock deep canvassing conversation, or actually I call it a mock one, but it's actually a real deep canvassing conversation. And we'd love for you to just answer 2 questions, which is the next slide. Um, which are, what do you like most about living in your community, and what issues are keeping you up at night? And however you get to those questions is up to you. You can practice that sort of, how you all will. So you should take turns. One person will be the canvasser, one person will be the voter, and then switch. And then, we'd love for you all to do that. And then actually, can you go back a slide, Zach? Sorry. So I'd love for you all to think about this, which the graphic that I show a little bit more, which is when you hear a hint of story, say, tell me more. And that tell me more has been really, really helpful to me when I can't think of anything when I'm at a door. I've actually, just as an aside, used this with my recalcitrant teenager, and it does help. So if it helps with him, I'm sure it will help with recalcitrant voters as well. And it's really just, asking them, like telling them that you want to hear their story and you want to hear kind of more of, what they want to share with you. Sort of like, how did that feel? What happened? Why do you think that happened? That kind of stuff. While it might seem like deep canvassing is masquerading as therapy, I will say that there are lots and lots of similarities between the two, but there's also reward. So I would love for you all to, if you go to the next slide, Zach, answer those 2 questions. I think Zach's going to put you into randomized breakout rooms. We'll give you like maybe 5 or 6 minutes to
Can
do
I ask
this.
a question
Yeah.
first before
Oh,
we
sure.
go to the groups? Because we're not even talking about the fact that we want to talk with them about voting then, right? So if we're approaching doors from the League of Women Voters, and then we're going to ask them, so what keeps you up at night? At least that's a connection with, because if somebody came to my door to ask me what keeps me up, and I'm like, I don't have time for this conversation. Truly.
Sure, yeah. So I mean, sure. I mean, I think that's totally fair. So we will have leave behinds. It doesn't mean that you don't ask them that question. Actually, in the real script that, in the script that we have, we do segue into going from what issues you have to, how can we help you? Like, do you think the government can help you with your issue? What do you think? What solutions would you like? So, like, kind of policy solutions, really is what we're going for. But whatever solutions they say, like, what do you think the government has a role to play here? And if they say yes, then we segue into the fact that there is a state that there is a really important election that's taking place in 2025, and that that their voice is really important. So ideally, you would go through like the entire gamut and then say like, here, we'd love to give you more information about voting. And I think that Melissa has some leave behinds that really give you, things about like when all the normal things about GOTV, like when to vote and all of that. So the entire conversation could be all of that. Um, it doesn't have to be. You can stop at any of these points depending on how you want to do. I think the key is just having an authentic connection with them. What we found in years past or in other things when you do this is if you go ahead and say, "Did you vote in the last election?" or it
Mm,
makes people more defensive.
okay.
Um, we also know of the list that we're pulling that these are folks who have not voted in
Okay.
2024.
So
So we
that's
already
where we're
know they don't
starting
vote.
then.
Yeah, so we
Sorry.
already know they're not voting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the population that we're going for. So yeah, and that particular population in general tends to like folks who don't always vote can also be defensive about the fact that maybe they're not civically engaged. So we're gonna kind of get at them from a
All right.
different connection point.
Thanks for just saying that differently.
Yeah, no. I threw a lot of information at you. This was not a deep canvassing webinar at all. So okay. So Zach, are you ready? And I promise this is really fun. Like it can be fun. I know it can be intimidating to be in breakout sessions with folks you don't know, but I promise you this is gentle.
Yeah, and we just as a reminder too, just because we know technology can be weird, if for whatever reason something happens where we don't like when we come back, if you're unable to do so, like, you can always rejoin through that link. But just a reminder that we are going to send everything out in that email. It should be pretty comprehensive of all the links and resources. So just in case, I know sometimes there's like a technological aspect to it. But we're gonna try right now to do that. And we do have a stop at 7:30, so we're gonna try to do this for a few minutes.
Mhm.
Okay.
Just great. Are you assigning rooms, Zach?
Yeah, I'm sorry. It randomized it and then it put everybody in their own chat in their own room. So I'm just trying to
Oh my gosh.
correct.
Sending us into solitary.
It won't let me
Yeah.
move Gene. I'm trying to get Gene over.
Huh.
Oh, there. 222. Okay, I think we'll have one that's overflow. Okay. All right. Everybody should have the ability to join the room. Okay.
Is
Um,
Jessica by herself? I can join a room with her, but
Anne Malone is by herself, I think, but
oh, okay.
because if you could join, are you able to see that or
Yeah, yeah, I just saw it.
Randy? And then
She's in room
Naomi's by
4.
herself, so I can join. Oh, I
You
can.
want to put Naomi and Anne together?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Oh, room 4. Okay, that might have worked. That's good.
All right.
I knew there'd be like a little technological.
Yeah.
It did it, and then it moved. It like I hit like okay, invite, and then they all went to their own rooms, and I was like, what is this?
Oh my God. Oh, this is the first time I'm doing breakout rooms. That's good. All right. So maybe I just didn't realize sort of what time it was. Wait, I should have put an alarm on for like 7:15 or something.
Good thing is there was a lot of questions in that in between there.
Yeah. That should begin like maybe 30 more seconds since it's 7:27-ish.
Yeah. And okay, should I close it? It's 7:28.
Yeah. Yeah, let's do that. I would give them a 1-minute warning.
Oh.
I didn't realize that. I thought like when you did that, they would all come at the same time.
That's what I thought. I
That
thought it
was
would just
amazing.
take everybody back, but I'm just trying to. Oop.
This is my first time using breakout rooms, so thank you for doing that. Or not using them, but co-hosting for it.
Welcome back. Woo. I think everybody made it.
Hi, welcome. Sorry, that was really short, but and I know we only have like a few more seconds, but I'd love to hear just one or maybe two comments on how you think it went. And then you can also put them in chat if you'd like. So anybody, one person want to share?
It definitely feels like you need quite a bit of time because just connecting and talking definitely takes time. It's like it seems like a high commitment, high reward approach to canvassing.
It definitely is a lot of commitment. Yeah, I agree, Joanna.
Can I
Did it
ask
feel?
a process
Yeah,
question?
sure.
These are people we are asking for a particular person. If the person that is on our list is not there, do
Yeah.
we talk to someone else, or do we say, "I'm sorry, we can only talk to that person"? And
That
then
is a really good question. Usually, well, we might have other people in that household, but if we don't, then you just say, okay, thank you so much. Here's the leave behind, and you keep going because we want to actually tag the data
the
that you
actual
get with their
person.
voter
Yeah,
file. Yeah.
gotcha.
So, yeah. Any
Okay.
other question? Oh, I think Naomi, you're on mute.
So I think where I felt the stiffest was in the tension between not becoming partisan and,
Mhm,
and so holding back my own thoughts. So I, I
mhm.
wanted to be engaging and could, but in terms of empathy, but then I also wanted to respond, and so I had to hold back, and that's where I felt stiff. And I'm just wondering if that gets easier as you go along in practice.
Yes and no. It gets easier in terms of like you can think of it's easier to practice certain responses, right? Like and think about like what else you could say that is much more empathetic towards their situation. And in some ways, to me, it might feel harder if you hear a lot of the same stories. So yeah, it does in terms of process, in terms of getting there, it does get easier with
Okay.
practice. It's great.
So
Um, yeah, sorry, go ahead, Jean.
I just wanted to mention Braver Angels because they have training that helps you talk to both sides. And I know we're not supposed to be partisan. And their whole goal is to get reds to speak to blues and blues to speak to reds, and what to do if you're surrounded by the other side, and how do you maintain your cool. And I guess I could say that one time we were out doing a voter registration table and a man came up to us and we didn't even say anything to him. He just started yelling at us
Oh, I'm sorry.
about, I don't know, it was, Trumpy stuff, but he wasn't terribly coherent. And we just said, oh, sorry, we're not trying to, make you do anything, but um, I'm concerned a little bit that there will be other people like that once you're at their door and you want to ask them about issues, that's going to turn into something that's going to be hard, very hard. So I think the practice sessions, we almost need like a video of somebody saying, "Hi, how are you? I'm from the League of Women Voters. I just wanted to ask you, what do you think about our community and how could we make it better?" And then, have somebody go off on you in a tirade and like, what do you do and how do you deal with it? Because to me,
I'm just gonna say, like, that's a hostile person. You do not need to engage with them, like,
just leave.
ever. Just
Just
ever.
leave.
No, you can say, thank you so much. So sorry to bother you if you feel like saying that, and you walk away. This
Okay.
is not you like engaging with people that are hostile.
Okay.
This is you engaging with people who, might be just not in the system. That the two aren't the same, right? So we would never ask you to engage with folks that are, that are that level of aggressive and hostile ever. So yeah.
So like just say thank you for your time. I'm gonna
Yep.
go now.
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly. And then just keep walking. And then there's a thing on the minivan that where you can like check off that this person is not interested or is, antagonistic or whatever it is. And we won't send, anyone else over there.
So you kept,
That is above and beyond.
you kept mentioning van and minivan. That's software. I've never heard of it before, but you keep
Yes. So it's Voter Activation Network. It is software that has voter information in it. So that's how you will use to know like where, like which house you're going to and which voter that you're going to be talking to.
and
So
you
yes,
record your
I'm sure there
results
are
there
lots of,
too.
I'm sorry?
You record your results there too.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
There'll be more. So I know that we've passed our time and people are dropping off. I just want to say thank you so much for being part of this. And if you want to go to the last slide, Zach, I think in here, yeah. So in terms of next up, if you're in Central Jersey, we have the session on Saturday. And then please join NJMVP and please join the league as well. So. Thank you. I don't know, Zach, if you want to close that up.
Yeah, just once again, a huge thank you for taking the time to cover that tonight with everyone. That is a massive help, and I know as we kind of move forward, you'll continue to be a resource and mentor as our local leagues start this process. And I think one thing we pulled towards the end is there's certainly some questions that are kind of percolating on in our minds. So again, please feel free to reach out via email, write it out. It can be you could send us 7 paragraphs. That is totally cool. If you want to set up a meeting, a Zoom meeting, we always try to make ourselves accessible. Whatever we can do to kind of hear your concerns or questions and be able to answer them. And Melissa is working on getting that full comprehensive list of next steps in that email that will be sent out. But again, thank you for hopping on, and thank you for taking the time to make our democracy work. I know it's a very long, frustrating day. It's a 7:35 on a really long day. And if you can take just 5 minutes out of your day to try to make things better, you're doing more than most. So I really appreciate that, and the league appreciates it as well. But thank you.
Thank
It was a
you.
great job, Artie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Zach. Bye.